Welcome to the Mavarick AI podcast. Today we're joined by Luke Hampton to discuss accessibility and alignment in supply chain data, what's holding organisations back, what's changing, and how better data can drive smarter decisions across the network. So, thank you for joining us today, Luke.
Pleasure.
To start, could you share a bit about your background and what first drew you into tackling supply chain data challenges?
Yeah, well, great to meet you and great to have the opportunity to speak to you and your audience. My name's Luke Hampton. I'm the head of supply chain at the SMMT. So, the SMMT is the UK Automotive Industries Trade Association. So, we are a representative body. We look after about 850 odd companies across the whole of the automotive industry. And my role is essentially focused on supporting the manufacturing supply chain within the UK automotive sector. So within the 850 odd companies that we work with, about a third of them sit within that manufacturing supply chain at some point. And so we try to, as a business, as a team, understand the commercial challenges that a lot of those businesses are facing, be it around, supply chain challenges. That's very much a hot topic at the minute, or it could be around issues around sort of competitiveness or increasing local content, business opportunities, commercial opportunities associated with growth. And yeah, that's the kind of the team, the job role. I've been with the business for about 14 years now, and about 12 of those have been focused on supply chain and the automotive industry supply chain in particular. Yeah, I kind of fell into it, to be honest. It was a little bit of an accident. I came to work for SMMT at a university and was working around technology and innovation policy to begin with. And an opportunity came up within the department that I currently sit within, which was focused more on that kind of the supply chain challenge. It seemed like a good opportunity. It was very much a kind of an external facing role, one which focused on the business challenges that a lot of the businesses that we work with facing. And so I kind of jumped into it.
And why is accessibility and alignment of supply chain data such a critical issue for businesses right now?
So just thinking back to those challenges that I've mentioned earlier, the level of risk that businesses are dealing with and trying to grapple with, and the level of uncertainty as well. It's just so high at the minute. So transparency across those supply chains becomes ever increasingly important. You need to know what level of exposure you have to a certain geographical area, a risk of disruption due to weather events, to particular trade flows, to certain markets. You need to have an understanding of what that is, and you can't do that without transparency. So you need that as a kind of a starting point. And also within that context, the requirements are increasing as well. So around sustainability, for example, the regulations are developing at a pace across at different speeds across different jurisdictions as well. So you need to have a really good handle on that just from a due diligence perspective, but also from the perspective of trying to meet your customers' demands. Customers demand more, investors demand more. They need to know where their money is going and that it's going towards a good cause, oftentimes. And we're seeing those demands reflected in the developing regulations as well. So it's so important now that businesses are able to essentially point the finger at the data that's underlying their supply chains, their operations, and for it to be a kind of a robust data set that they can stand behind as businesses, in order to make sure that they are operating legally and they're operating in a positive way for the greater good of society as well.
What's making it so difficult for organisations to gather trustworthy, consistent data from across their supply networks?
Certainly within the automotive sector, the structure of the manufacturing supply chain is such that there are issues of trust between different tiers. So within automotive, you have a vehicle manufacturer and an OEM it's being supplied by a number of tier ones. They in turn are being supplied by tier twos, tier threes, etc., right the way down to raw materials. And the reason for that is it's an outsourcing model. So the vehicle manufacturers themselves, they don't want to put down all of the capital for all of the parts that they need to make. It makes much more economic sense if they're able to outsource that to another company who would be able to supply those same parts, leverage that same piece of equipment, and supply a number of different vehicle manufacturers as well. And so you end up having this relationship between the tiers. Each one is very keen to protect their own commercial interests within the vehicle manufacturers or the vehicle's bill of materials. So in outsourcing that, you also outsource a level of responsibility. And if I'm a tier one, I don't necessarily want to be telling my vehicle manufacturer, who is then supplying me, what the profit margin is that I'm making on the value add that I'm providing, because that would in turn provide a bit of downward pressure on my pricing. And so there's quite a lot of kind of protectionism, I guess, between different parts of the industry and the different tiers. And the same thing happens further down. The tier twos don't necessarily want to be sharing all of their data with their tier ones as well. So this inherent lack of trust, because of kind of the structural setup of the automotive industry's supply chain, does mean that it can be quite difficult for data to flow between those tiers. And you need to be able to demonstrate a kind of a benefit to everybody involved in order to kind of address some of those trust issues. And, the sustainability piece is one potential route to go down, but it's a challenging one to overcome. I've been working in this particular area for a number of years now, and you're fighting against a whole range of different challenges, be it around, institutional memory or the behaviors or the way that sourcing is incentivized, for example. It's very difficult to change a lot of those patterns and behaviors quickly in order to achieve a fast change in behavior to make it easier for the right sort of data to be flowing between those different tiers.
We know that many initiatives fail because of data engagement issues. So, what tends to stop suppliers or partners from sharing the data that's needed, and how can this be addressed?
Oftentimes it comes down to self-interest. So there's oftentimes with these sorts of data collection exercises, there is a cost implication. There is a cost associated with collecting the information. That could be time, resource, people, or technology. It could be you need to sign up to platform X, platform Y, and that can be difficult for businesses to invest in if they can't see the direct line of sight to some sort of a return. We've been involved in a number of different activities that have tried to do things around supply chain mapping, for example, and a couple of supply chain sustainability related programs as well. And oftentimes it is just that case that there isn't a clear and very explicit financial benefit to those who want to take part, or if you're being forced to by your customer, as sometimes happens, there's a kind of a challenge in that space over who pays for it. Do you pay to be part of the approved suppliers, which we've seen happen in a number of different instances? Or is it you will not get the business unless you're kind of signed up to platform or program A or B? So that can oftentimes be a bit of a hindrance to take up activity in that area. The other way I think that you can come up against challenges is around the regulation. So that can often set a minimum threshold, a minimum level, and that can make it difficult for businesses to want to exceed beyond that. That can be a challenge too. Or where you've got regulation that affects one business, say an end customer, and in order for them to meet their requirements, they need to then push those further down. Again, you come into that kind of barrier of what's in it for me when I'm a supplier in that space, given some of the costs associated that we mentioned earlier.
How do fragmented systems, standards, and definitions hinder collective progress? And what would help bring greater alignment?
So this is something that we're experiencing at the moment within the automotive sector. There is understandably an increased focus on trying to understand what the CO2 of the vehicles is that are being produced in terms of the embedded CO2, carbon footprints, etc. And what we're seeing is that the vehicle manufacturers are asking the questions that they need to ask of their suppliers, as you'd expect. And they tend to be asking very similar questions to each other in very similar formats, but fundamentally slightly differently. And suppliers are having to respond to these, and oftentimes They're getting asked potentially, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 times the same set of questions in slightly different formats. And it's a burden to them because they have to answer each one individually. They have to go through the exercises that are required, the processes that are required to share that data often. And there's often a huge amount of overlap, which can be good in terms of time saving, but in terms of filling out the forms, etc., it can be a bit burdensome. That's a real challenge. So I guess the clear opportunity in that area is around standardization. There's an opportunity for automotive businesses, automotive manufacturers to come together around those kind of standards to make sure that it's as easy and as simple as possible for everybody involved to be declaring the data that's required by the end customers, particularly around kind of embedded CO2, scope 1, 2 figures, all those sorts of things. But it's challenging getting different multinational vehicle manufacturers to sing off the same hymn sheet when they're headquartered in different ways. Each has their own system, their own ecosystem, their own preferred providers that are already operating in this space, their own protocols, their own communication systems, etc. It's very difficult to bring all of those different interests together around a consensus position. And even if we were able to do that from a UK standpoint across the UK vehicle manufacturing network, you'd then quickly run into issues because we're inherently embedded within the European supply chain still, European manufacturing supply chain. So you'd come up against problems with European manufacturers. So realistically, we need to be doing something at a kind of UK and EU level as well, which brings its own set of challenges too. So it's not an easy one, but it's a relatively simple solution. It's not necessarily going to be an easy solution to achieve, if that makes sense.
Have you seen examples where organizations have successfully improved data visibility across their supply chains? And what lessons stand out from those efforts?
I think, yes, we've seen some good examples, particularly in responses to some of the recent shocks and crises. The chip shortage is a really good example where I mentioned earlier the tiered structure of the manufacturing supply chain. What tends to happen is that the level of visibility for a vehicle manufacturer below tier 2 is relatively poor. They may have a half decent handle on what tier 2 looks like into some of their critical tier 1s from a risk management perspective, but certainly below that level, the visibility tends to be pretty poor. Now that changed for a lot of manufacturers post the chip shortage because they realized that without the chips and without a really solid understanding of the level of risk associated with a shortage of those key chips across all of their products, they would have a very difficult time of manufacturing finished vehicles. And so a lot of them have done a lot of work to fully map the kind of the chip supply chains that go into their vehicles so they understand the risks ongoing. And obviously that wouldn't have happened without a crisis. And so, the automotive industry is very good at managing crises. It's very good at kind of reacting to situations and coming up with a better solution in the end. It's an industry that's full of engineers, to no surprise. So it can be very positive in terms of the outcome from some of the more challenging issues that the industry is faced with. And so, not that I'm asking for more crises or more shocks, but those sorts of environments can lead you to a more resilient place, certainly afterwards.
So, beyond technology, what kinds of incentives, partnerships, or governance models are helping to build trust and consistency in shared data?
I think the regulation is a big driver in this space, especially what's happening or what has been happening, certainly on a European standpoint, although it seems to be that there's some changes within that space. But the regulation for a lot of the businesses drives a lot of the supply chain due diligence activities, and associated with that is the kind of the sustainability piece to an extent, that kind of broader ESG agenda. A lot of the work to develop those regulations and the application of those, in particular with the kind of the large organizations to begin with, and with a trickle down that will come off the back of that, means that a lot of the manufacturers at that larger level are having to grapple with the same things. They're having to deal with the shared challenge and aspiration, because a lot of them do want to kind of get to that net zero future and have made, the relevant commitments to do so. By having a kind of a clear roadmap of what that looks like, it means that they can all together in the same way. So in theory, it should improve, it should get better, it should get easier for a lot of the manufacturers in that space. And then off the back of that, obviously, the rest of the supply chain will be able to help our industry achieve their aspirations.
If you could unlock one change that would dramatically improve supply chain data accessibility over the next few years, what would that be?
Going back to the point about standardization, I think that would probably be the biggest single win that the automotive industry could gain from. If all of the industry, globally, if everybody could agree to a single data protocol, a standardized communications protocol around supply chain related data, and that would cover sustainability, it would cover the kind of the broader ESG agenda, it would cover other key supply chain metrics. If we were able to get to a space where that was agreed, fully accessible as well, independent of size of business and position within the tiered supply chain, etc. If we were able to get to that place, I think that would have an absolutely massive effect on all parties' ability to understand their role in achieving a fully transparent supply chain, one that was with a really robust data set that stood behind it, in order to make sure that everybody essentially knows what's going on and can manage their supply chains more effectively, to avoid some of the things that we've seen recently in terms of costly disruptions, due diligence issues, stopped operations, halted operations. The loss of value creation that comes off the back of those can be and has been really quite significant, affecting people, communities, livelihoods, businesses. So if we're able to create that kind of ecosystem where everybody is essentially speaking the same language and there's a really strong level of interconnectivity, I think that's the kind of the utopia that a lot of people in the supply chain think about. And it can only happen with a single standardized approach to data and data sharing, I think.
And how do you think better aligned data will reshape the way supply chain leaders make decisions and collaborate going forward?
So I think if you have this transparent vision of what the supply chain looks like, and you have this full visibility of your products and your products and where they come from and the routes and the sources, the markets, the geopolitical risks, etc. From a risk management perspective, you're in a much better place. From a decision-making perspective, you're in a much better place because you have all the information to hand. You can make an informed decision on, strategically, where do we need to be sourcing from that's going to help us manage our own positions. Do I need to dual source product X? Do I need to move out of this geographical region? Can I afford to take the hit on the carbon with this supplier in order to offset that with the kind of the cost benefit that comes from it? All of those decisions are being made already. It's just we don't necessarily have the complete picture when those procurement decisions are being made. And that's essentially an inefficient supply chain to an extent. So that sort of level of transparency, I think, would massively help businesses and supply chain leaders in essentially designing and choosing the kind of the best supply chain for the future.
Okay, great. Thank you, Luke, for sharing your perspectives.
Pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners as well. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you are taking away some useful insights on unlocking supply chain data at scale.